Well, welcome all to Thursday, the 9th of June. I think it's still the 9th of June. Had a very long day for the Technical Advisory Council. So usual warnings at the beginning. Antitrust policy notice, Linux Foundation meetings do involve participation by lots of competitors. So, if in doubt, just be a bit careful what you say and have a chat to your own company's lawyers if needs be. The antitrust policy is available on the website. Code of conduct 2, we are a happy smiley place. Well, most of the time, unless we're talking about Ansible, in which case, our code of conduct is available on GitHub at that link. If you do have any worries about anything that's said here or any behaviors that you see or hear, either here on Slack, on email, do let us know. We can sort it out if we know about it. And you can either approach myself, approach Jim, or email the code of conduct email address if needs be as well. The council is the members of the current members of the council. I think most of us will be here today. Quick agenda today, chair notes. I've got a very brief chair notes today. And then we'll go through the project updates. And then we have a presentation from our very own Carol with the Linux for Healthcare proposal, which I've finally given her access to upload. Future TAC topics and then open discussion. Chair notes, I have no interestings this week other than I'm going to an Open UK event later today, which is a black tie event at the Houses of Parliament, which is kind of cool. But not particularly useful information for the rest of you, I realise, but it's interesting. So I'm going to try and talk more to people about open source and healthcare. So fly in the LFPH flag whilst I'm there. Events, the Cardea Interopathon is still going, so do check the Slack link and the web link for that. Helps, I've still got a couple of helps, please. So if you haven't had a chance yet, please do comment on the Kubernetes for Healthcare concept document. I'm going to flesh that out this weekend and ready for the next TAC meeting. And we have a kind of landscape proposal that's kind of fallen by the wayside a bit, so we do need to kind of have a look at that as well. Are there any other interesting events or helps anyone's got? Going once, going twice. Gone. Okay, cool. Existing project updates, Cardea, as I mentioned, the Interopathon. I'm not sure who's on today because I've not got my usual 2 screens. So if anybody's on that can give an update to any projects on the screen, please shout now. Nope. Okay. Update on Herald. We're doing more and more work on the kind of Bluetooth mesh side of Herald and linking that for edge deployments. So that will be published soon as well. I'm going to do some more work on the C++ layer so it supports Linux Bluetooth subsystem as well. So that's some vague news on that. New potential product updates. So the presentation today will be on Linux for Healthcare. So I don't know, Carol, if you wanted to give an update on the project generally now or wait until your piece. What's your preference?
The only thing I'll say now is it's officially Linux for Health and it's Kubernetes for Healthcare. So
got it. Cool.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the only thing, and then the rest of it we can do, as part of the presentation.
Well, let me do that now. So if I strike through that, I can find my strike through. Oh dear. I'll just delete it. Be easier. Okay. So Linux for Health, Kubernetes for Healthcare, and I'll probably get told off for putting a 4 in there instead of an F, but we'll see.
Yeah, I actually like the switch from healthcare to health, frankly, because it's a much more interesting and broader space. At least coming from, I mean, it probably feels a little bit different because you're in a country with a socialized medicine system.
Well, this is true. Yeah.
In the US, health is a state of being. Healthcare is a major commercial industry.
Right. Okay. That's a very good point, actually. That is a very, very good point. Yeah. So what do you think about the Kubernetes for healthcare then? Do you think it should just be health as well?
It kind of depends on who your market's going to be. I mean, if you're looking to sell to that major commercial industry, then...
Well, because the idea is it will help both industry software vendors as well as those who deliver healthcare, so be that socialized over here or for profit over there to build new software and integrate software. So I suppose you could argue it's both, really. What's everybody else's thoughts? I'm kind of open because I'm really bad at naming things. So
I think it's fine as is.
okay, cool. And is there any
You could put that as an open question in your document.
Yeah, good idea.
And then anybody
Yeah.
who's reading it will comment.
Perfect.
By the document, I did mean.
Yeah, the other one. I'll put it in there as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. This is just to remind me to do the other thing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it needs to be in both. That's a very good point. Okay, cool. I think that's all the project updates we have for these projects, unless anybody's joined the call the last couple of minutes, in which case shout at me. Nope. Okay. New project ideas. There was a couple suggested last time by Lucy. I've not had a chance to look at them yet. I'm hoping to get some time this weekend to look at them. But if anybody else has new project ideas or inspirations, then please do let everybody know. You can let us know on Slack, email, or in the next meeting. Presentation. So, I need to change that now, don't I? There we go. So I shall stop sharing. I think you should be able to share yourself without me clicking any buttons. So do you have that ability?
Let us see.
Yes, magic's happening. Yes, I've got it. Perfect. Over to you then.
All right. So I followed your format, as close as I could, as close as it made sense for the Linux for Health proposal. I started out with an abstract and then realized that the abstract was no longer an abstract because it was getting too large. So the general idea behind Linux for Health and why we're pushing this proposal forward is that we want to put the compute for healthcare in the location that the data resides. So healthcare tends to be isolated, and in order to do meaningful operations on it, say you wanted to do some sort of analysis, moving it to a cloud environment, especially large amounts of data, is just not feasible for everyone, right? And so if we bring the compute and the analysis to the data, that's where Linux for Health comes in. So Linux for Health, it is a set of multiple integrated open source solutions. I'm not going to read word for word, but this is a good setup. And one of the ideas, in addition to bringing compute to where the data resides, is that Linux for Health also strives to abstract away the complexities of writing healthcare software, and we'll use healthcare in this case, especially around data ingestion, validation, transformation. And so out of the box, there's FIRE R4, HL7v2, X12, DICOM supported data types, and there's also an HL7v2 to FIRE component, and these are all actually, X12 is a library, HL7v2 to FIRE is also a library. That's not supported out of the box because there's no standard HL7v2 to FIRE transformation that needs to be configured. But that's available under the Linux for Health umbrella of open source projects. And there are also source targets that include what's now the Linux for Health FIRE server. The IBM FIRE server has been rebranded under Linux for Health, and we've actually moved the repo under Linux for Health. Also supports Microsoft FIRE server and Postgres, and can be configured to support any other storage system. So it's one of the hallmarks is that it's really extensible. We saw this architecture when we talked about Linux for Health the first time. So just real quick, the chip architecture, then OS, containers, low-level APIs, and then the libraries and REST APIs above that. Applications all built on that. Portability.
Quick
Go ahead,
question.
Sure.
Because I really love where you're going in terms of bringing compute to data. I think that's incredibly smart. But I was kind of curious in the spirit of that. Is anyone involved with Linux for Health looking at WebAssembly? WebAssembly.
Yeah, we have looked at it. We're not actively looking at it right now, but it's definitely on the radar.
Mm-hmm. That's fine. Just curious.
But what's the context that you're interested in?
Well, so if you're wanting, so I tend to think about the world in terms of the sort of weight of the compute that's being shipped around, right? So you're moving the compute towards the data. Makes total sense. Most people tend to think about units of workload right now in terms of Docker containers because they're incredibly lighter than VMs, incredibly lighter. But the world actually wants to get even lighter than that. I do a lot of stuff that involves people who complain about how heavy Docker containers have gotten. Sometimes legitimately because you have people who do dumb things like, here's my 3 GB Docker container, which makes me want to cry.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me want to cry every day as well. Yeah.
It is actually the one question I've given my inorganic growth things to ask anyone in Cloud Native that will loan them with it and talk to them or not. How big are your Docker containers? If they're bigger than a few hundred meg, walk away. Don't even ask another question. But even then, too large and also often too internally complex. And so the thing that I see emerging for beyond that are stuff like WebAssembly. So if you look at Lucid, for example, which I think it was either Fastly or Cloudflare, I always get those two mixed up in my head, have produced basically a serverless environment for running WebAssembly with 50 microsecond quick starts. And so it's always struck me that WebAssembly is sort of where the world is going in terms of lighter things. And if you're going to move compute to data, you want to move lighter things. Anyway, and digression.
Yeah, I think ever so slight digression on the digression. I think that's true, but the Knative approach, which is going kind of towards function as a service, is super interesting for that on the server side as well.
No, don't get me wrong. I love Knative, but if you've ever tried to start from zero behaviors in Kubernetes, they're not nearly as fast as you want them to be. You're not talking order of 50 microsecond cold starts.
Not
you're talking maybe 1 second cold start.
Yeah. You scale to 1 rather than 0, I think, a lot of the time. Definitely.
Yeah. Anyway.
Okay. Good context. Thank you. Portability we've talked about, but it's the ability for Linux for Health to run on 390 on cloud environments, which are typically AMD 64, ARM 64, which is the upcoming Apple and IoT environment. So those of us that are going to use new Apple laptops for development are going to get ARM 64 by default, which is interesting. So when we see that in a deployed environment, so you can see Linux for Health running on ARM devices. These are all networked together, but the networking does not have to be out of the box. You don't have to run a Linux for Health network. That's configurable and optional. But in this diagram, you can see Linux for Health, and Linux for Health is in the center, but it's not centralized. There isn't really a central, that's more of a label. Linux for Health is actually running on IBM Z, Linux One, which are basically the same environment, cloud environments, and ARM. And when you do network the Linux for Health environments together, they're able to operate on a common source of data that can be considered a single source of truth, which is good for implementing what we think of as a longitudinal patient record. See, synchronize, we just talked about that. Okay, so containers versus operating systems. You probably, if you saw the last presentation, we talked a lot about the Health OS, and that is something that we're working on right now, Linux for Health OS. That is an operating system that has the Linux for Health services starting up when the OS boot, has development environments pre-deployed, picture your Python development environment deployed and configured. Any services that need to be run are already there. But Linux for Health will also still be deployable as containers, because that is helpful for Kubernetes environments. It's helpful for development where you want to deploy locally running under Docker or Minikube. And we'll look at those towards the end. We'll look at those scenarios. But the important thing is that Linux for Health is both a Health OS and a set of containers that can be deployed.
Quick question. In addition to Minikube, are you also moving towards supporting Kind?
Kind?
Kind. KIND, Kubernetes and Docker. The reason I bring it up is I don't know anyone who's run Minikube in the last few years. Everybody's moved over to Kind.
Okay, good to know.
So definitely worth knowing about, and super nice for running all the stuff on your laptop.
Yeah, we use it at work all the time. I think one of the things we sorry to interrupt, Ed, but I think one of the things we probably want to do in the Kubernetes for Health /care project is make sure we help the Linux for Health team kind of Kuberneteseify the installation. So not just to help that project, but also
there's a lot out there, and it's very hard to find your way through all of it. And
yeah,
there
exactly.
are also a variety of opinions, and it's not so much about having the right one; it's understanding the ins and outs. So, for example,
the trade-offs, yeah.
You've got the customized versus Helm folks. I won't get into who's right.
Helm.
See, I would disagree with you there, but I'm very much a customized because it's cool.
Yeah, well, we can help them out on that. I think that's no problem.
Right. So we have had contributed a set of Helm charts for Kubernetes deployment of Linux for Health, but that's not something that we focused on. So it would be good to see, what Kubernetes for Healthcare offers in that respect, or what we can leverage from Kubernetes for Healthcare.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's see, summary. Okay, a couple of problems that we've touched on already and are here just to cement those is attacking development complexity and making it easier to develop software, and attacking the data isolation problem, what we talked about at the beginning about not moving large amounts of data in order to operate on it to gain insights. And what, as a solution, Linux for Health provides today a REST API that automatically detects what type of data is being ingested. And so it supports R4, HL72X12, and DICOM today. It uses Kafka for auditable records for ingestion, and has a configurable ability to transmit downstream. So when you think of downstream, that could be to a file server or secondary storage. If you think of Kafka as being the primary record, you can have the equivalent of off-chain storage, external storage for that record in whatever you want, whether it's Postgres. We have out of the box IPFS configured for off Kafka storage. Configurable synchronization and a Health OS. The Health OS is in progress, which will be able to deploy either in a VM environment, picture Azure and being able to select Linux for Health OS as the OS that you deploy in Azure or any other cloud environment. Or you can deploy directly bare metal basically onto a physical device, which is what we do when we deploy to Raspberry Pi, for example, as an ARM device. The out-of-the-box Connect is one of the projects of Linux for Health, and that's the main container-based deployment of Linux for Health, and there's a repository for that. in GitHub. And out of the box, you get Kafka, NATS for exactly once message delivery, Postgres, MS SQL, OpenSearch, File Server, and IPFS that we talked about. A couple of things we've implemented a lot, this is just an example, but a Blue Button client and OpenSearch-based LPR and integration for analytics with annotator for clinical data that we call ACD. And all of that is done using a workflow that it's basically ingest, validate, transform. We'll zoom in a little bit here. Persist, transmit, and synchronize. And all that is done. And when you synchronize, you're synchronizing between a Linux for Health instance and another configured Linux for Health instance for that single source of truth capability. When in the Health OS, one of the changes is going to be that we will use NATS basically as a message bus between every step of the way. So basically ingest, store to NATS, ingest from NATS, do the next step. And the reason that we're doing that, we're using NATS Jetstream, and that's what gives the exactly once delivery, and it gives a lot of resiliency and observability. We're using NATS today, and exactly once is implemented, but we're going to be using it more pervasively in the Health OS. So use cases for Linux for Health. As a cloud deployment operator, I want to deploy Linux for Health in my cloud environment. I want to deploy it as an OS to save time and effort. Or also as a cloud deployment operator, I want to deploy Linux for Health in my Kubernetes cloud environment. Or we talked about deploying locally, and we'll look into, instead of Minikube, we'll consider that to be kind. That's something that I want to look into for local development. So that was a good discussion. For Z, be able to deploy onto a Z environment to get a trusted execution environment. And IBM Secure Execution is one example of that on a Z system. Or being able to deploy, and this is longer term, but being able to deploy, we want resiliency and observability, but be able to deploy a Linux environment on multiple nodes in a cluster for resiliency, even in a single customer's environment. And that's going to require more HA work, especially when a Linux for Health node goes down, bringing it back up in exactly the same configuration without data loss.
Yeah, the Kubernetes deployment wrapper should be able to help with a fair bit of that.
Yeah, it depends. So that'll be one way to do that, but also being able to deploy the Linux for Health node. Just picture 3 VMs connected together.
Gotcha. Yeah. Like 3 separate AZs, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So there are a number of different ways we can shake and bake this, but Kubernetes for Health. So a good integration for Kubernetes. See, I'm saying it the health way. Kubernetes for healthcare, a good way to do integration with Linux for Health is to use some of the libraries that are repositories that we talked about. So the X12 library, the HL7 Fire, and there are a number of those that could be used by people writing applications for K4H that would help expedite development.
I had a good example come up in a conversation yesterday, actually. So it was around remote radiologists. They can buy a remote radiology computer, but it costs like 30 grand a pop. So I was thinking, well, that's a super simple thing to do in cloud native. You can access on the server side the images and do like you do for high definition web maps. You tile them up and you do that at different resolutions for different zoom levels. And if you did that and then sent them to a web client, that would be one good example of a value add service. So yes, there's lots of, you're right. There's loads of little application things like that would be kind of super useful. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, future work, continue work on the Health OS and any new open source libraries that we can add to help jumpstart application development. So that's a big thing that there is in common between Kubernetes for healthcare and Linux for health is rapid development. Right? And I will stop sharing. And I guess we'll go ahead and put that out. You said you gave me access to the.
I did, yeah. Sorry about that. I thought I did it on Saturday, but obviously my kind of
fine.
brain got diverted without me realizing it. So sorry about that. So yeah, I've given you access now. It should have sent you an email to your work email.
Okay.
But if not, I sent you the kind of link on Slack as well, so you should just be able to click that and get straight into it. Yeah. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, sorry about that. So you've got edit rights, so just be a bit careful when you're in the folder. That's the rights. That's the rights I was given when I added mine in. So you should be good to go. If you have any questions, though, just kind of reach out and I'll help you out on that.
Okay, thanks. And so I'll post that after this call, and I'll also post a link to it in the TAC.
Yeah, great. I've left a space in the presentation to put a link in as well, but I can put that in once you see it on Slack. I'll do that.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks a lot for that. I've just added this in as well because I just realized, Jenny is back, which is great. So for people not on the call, they'll get that information as well. Yeah, thanks for that kind of project update. I was going to ask, what's the kind of formal next steps? Now it's been introduced. As Jim giving you any idea on kind of timelines, formal votes and those sorts of things? Because I think we're struggling to get lots of people to these calls. So if we know in advance, kind of formal adoption votes or whatever, then we can make sure we get enough people on the call to do that in one go. I don't suppose you've had any conversations about that, have you?
No, I haven't. I was going to ask you the same thing. So
yeah, I've not caught up with Jim in the last week or so. So I know he was planning, because I think there's 2 or 3 things about to come out, and I was kind of keen to see if we could not really, do presentations like this, but then keep them open for a bit and then do kind of one vote just to make sure there's enough people on the call to get a few projects through. But especially with summer holidays coming up. But I'll talk to Jim about that and see what we can do. Is there any kind of timelines or dates that we need to be aware of to work towards for such a vote, or are you pretty easy on dates and timings?
I think the timing is fine, whether it's soon or whether it's in a month or.
Okay. Yeah. I should hope it's less than a month, but yeah, we'll definitely find out. Yeah, I'll chase that up tomorrow. No problem. Yeah, thanks for that. That's great. Is there anything that you need from us to help on that? I know we'd kind of interjected with a couple of comments around kind in Kubernetes, but is there any help you need on the proposal itself?
I don't think so. I think we'll go with it in the format that it is now, and cool. I may update that to kind before I submit it. No, but other than that, I think we're good. Thank you, though.
Great. Yeah, no problem. If you do need anything, let me know. Okay, great. I think, were there any questions on that before I kind of move on? I don't know. Steamroll anybody if they've got questions to add. Jenny, anything on that?
Nope, I'm good.
Or mini Jenny, if the mini Jenny's around. No? Okay, cool. Great. Yeah, thanks for that. So future TAC presentation topics, we've kind of run out of a few ideas, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing at the moment because we're about to enter the summer holiday season. So I think we've already seen a drop off in the last couple of meetings. I don't think that's necessarily because they're getting more boring. At least I hope they're not, because no one's telling me they are anyway. So I think it's just because people are starting to have holidays and taking time out. So I think if we have any ideas for presentation topics, I'll start queuing them up for kind of the end of the summer holidays, unless anybody's got any kind of burning desires for presentations on particular topics. I know there's some things kind of going on in the periphery. So I know, for example, there's going to be a new Pandemic Sciences Institute, PSI, at Oxford, which is going to be formally opened. I think it's on I want to say it's the 6th of July. It's that type of thing. So there's a few things kind of going on in the kind of healthcare, future pandemic space, as well as the open source software space. But if anybody wants a presentation on any of these things, let me know and I'll try and arrange it. But other than that, I'll just start queuing up ideas for kind of late August. I don't know, Ed, is it worth, we've been talking about Kubernetes for health/healthcare. You and I are kind of from a CNCF kind of Kubernetes-y world. Is it worth doing a generic, why is it relevant to healthcare presentation at all, do you think?
I mean, possibly. I tend to think about it a little bit more broadly than just Kubernetes, though.
Yeah.
So I often give a variation of this talk internally, and I always couch it as a cloud native talk.
Yes.
And the reason I do that is because cloud native is a way of thinking about problems.
Agreed.
And I have seen people do hideously non-cloud native things in Kubernetes.
Yep. I've seen people confuse cloud native with native cloud as well, which is the other thing, and they get vendor lock-in.
Yeah, well, the other one that always blows my mind is I always just facepalm every time I come across a group who says, "Oh yeah, no, we're cloud native. We run in the public cloud."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's totally yeah.
Oh my god. But
yeah, exactly.
The point is, the way of thinking is actually super useful.
I agree.
And what would be interesting to sort of discuss if we were going to talk about it is like what areas that are apropos to Linux for healthcare, Kubernetes for healthcare, etc. Because it varies a little bit, right?
Yep.
So usually when I give that talk, I'll take the CNCF talks definition of cloud native, which is very well written, but is basically a complete eyesore of text on a slide. And I'll highlight a couple of pieces and drill down. And the pieces that I highlight and drill down for my internal presentations, some of them may be the ones that you want to talk about. For example, minimal toil, which everyone should talk about all the time.
Absolutely.
But some of them may be less interesting to others than they are to my internal audiences. Like immutable infrastructure is a super important concept to understand if you're used to building physical boxes, but probably not the most useful topic to drill into for the healthcare side.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, because I, doing what I do in a day job, I think that's super important. But of course, I think most people are more interested in outcomes in health rather than plumbing, I suppose, is the impolite way of putting it. But yeah, I think cloud native thinking, you're right. I think that's, decomposing things in that way, I think is probably something that you should have a presentation on. Are you?
Well, and interestingly, by the way, it seems like a lot of the stuff that's going on with Linux for Health is sort of in an interesting straddling position, because you're not just trying to support Kubernetes. You've got a bunch of other things that you need to support as well. And that will sometimes drive you to decisions which are correct given your target environments, but would be wildly improper if Kubernetes was your only target environment.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
So it's a super fascinating area. I very much follow what really matters at the end of the day is how you learn to think, because that will lead you to better solutions for the situations you find yourself in.
Yep. Do you mind if I put your name against that to present, or would you like to present with somebody else, or have somebody else present? What's your
I'm happy to collaborate with somebody else, but I probably would need to collaborate with somebody who's actually closer to the needs of actual healthcare consumers.
Gotcha.
Because I have some of those coming from sort of an American-centric side of things, but we have a lot of things in the US that distort, I suspect distort the nature of our market and the nature of the technology that's interesting compared to much of the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Right. So for example, our entire world is driven by billing codes. The whole world.
Yeah.
If it doesn't have a billing code, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I would like to believe that's not true of the National Health Service. You can fill me in if I'm
we're
wrong.
really bad at billing. We're totally bad at billing, so it's got nothing to do with billing.
Oh no, we're also bad at billing. We're really bad at billing. But I mean, like if you go to a doctor in the US, it will spend months wending its way through your insurer, and then you might get a bill for $6 in the mail from someone you don't even remember. So we're dramatically bad at billing, but it's clear that that's what the world is centered around.
Yeah, I gotcha. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I'll have a think, see if I can think of anybody. Because I know Cote would be a really good person to talk on the kind of business benefits of that way of thinking, but I'm not sure how much healthcare background he's got. I'll have a think, see if I can think of anybody. But Carol, you might well know somebody as well on that front potentially.
Yeah, I have to think about it.
Yeah, we'll have a think and see what we can come up with. But yeah, that's great. Any other ideas for kind of new presentations? I suppose I wonder if it's worth, and Jenny might be able to answer this if I'm not putting her on the spot with childcare at the same time as the presentation. But we've been around kind of 2 years this month, haven't we? Really, so we should probably do like a 2-year kind of birthday / review presentation at some point as well. Is it 2 years? I've lost track.
It's yes, it will be 2 years in July. I mean, we can definitely do something like that. I'm wondering, it seems like the open house that Jim hosted, was it last month, maybe also did that.
Okay. Yeah.
But which so I think one question is just to check if there was overlap between those groups. But if not, then I think that doing something for this audience would be a great idea.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll have a rewatch of that presentation and see if there's kind of a different kind of spin to put on it, maybe a more technical spin. I'll have a think. But yeah, that's a great idea. Any more? Any other thoughts? No. Okie dokie. Yeah. Any other business? I think this was from last time. Actually, get rid of that. Yeah, I think this was. Yeah, Pete brought this up last time. Is there any other kind of business to cover? Anybody got any news, potential future project things, other random thoughts that they want to share with everybody? Nope. Okay. In that case, I shall stop sharing. So thank you all for your time, and thanks for the people watching at home. But yeah, thanks for the presentation, Carol. And I think the next meeting is in 2 weeks' time, which yeah, it's in 2 weeks' time. So I'll be hopefully doing for Kubernetes for whatever we're calling it. The same thing that Carol's done today for that, hopefully. And then the one after that, just to be aware, I'm on holiday. I'm actually in Wisconsin, of all places. The meeting after that. So if there's a volunteer to host, that'd be great. If not, I'll have a chat to Jim and Jenny and get a stand-in for that in 2 meetings' time. But if there's nothing else, I'd thank you all for your time, and I'll let you go 15 minutes early. Time off for good behavior.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, everyone. And welcome back, Jenny.
Thanks much.